of planning our stream cleanup as well. It's on this Saturday, 9 to 12. We have 1,000 volunteers this year who are going to clean up all of the streams, the Perkiomen Creek and all its tributaries. We have 50 different sites, so it's been a hectic week. People calling last minute to sign up, trying to get enough supplies for everybody, and gearing up for the spring, planning our new rain gardens at the Conservancy. And we're going to be installing a cistern, which is like a rain barrel to hold water, our rainwater, and be able to use that instead of letting it go into the creek. And we'll be having a rain barrel workshop where you'll actually make your rain barrels. So if anyone's interested in making rain barrels, June 2nd, if anyone's interested in helping to plant rain gardens, we're going to be doing that the week of May 14th. So check out our website. Our link should be on your handout, and you can look for more opportunities to find out what you can do on your own property to help with managing stormwater in the watershed. All right. My name's Krista. I'm from the Perkiomen Watershed Conservancy. We do a lot of education stuff, and we do a lot of, well, my end of it is the conservation part, where we go out and plant riparian buffers with trees. We naturalize stormwater basins, do whatever we can to make the water as clean as possible before it enters the stream and is used for recreation and fishing and swimming, as well as drinking water, because a lot of people take their drinking water from the Perkiomen. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is stormwater runoff. This is what you'll be confronting by planting a rain garden. Stormwater runoff is simply the rainwater that comes down and runs off our roadways, our roofs, any impervious surfaces, anything that we've built that prevents stormwater from seeping into the ground as it would naturally. And we've made a lot of obstacles for water. And that water ends up all hitting the pavement, hitting our roofs, and rushing into the stream all at once. And the problem with that is it picks up all the pollutants that we've created, heavy metals from our toxic pollutants in the air, petroleum products from along the roads and from hitting our cars. We have lawn and agriculture fertilizers that get picked up along the way. Animal, pet waste, this is why it's important to pick up after your dogs. And all of that runs into the stream. Another problem with that high volume is that it will erode the stream banks. It'll take a lot of soil, small particles of soil called silt, with it into the stream. And it can clog up the stream bed so that fish can't lay their eggs. It pollutes our water. We don't want it in our water. So one of the main goals of a rain garden is to slow down that water from rushing into our streams and to reduce the amount of stormwater that is running off of our own properties. I think I covered all of those points. So here's a little schematic of the different percentages of runoff you have with different percentages of development. So naturally, with a natural ground cover, you'll see that there's only 10% running off, heading towards our streams, and most of it is being absorbed into the soil. That's 50%, 25 and 25, is being absorbed into the soil. And there's 40% that's being used by plants and released into the atmosphere. You can see with just one house, we've doubled the runoff. We've got a house and a road next to it up there in the right-hand corner. And we've already doubled the amount of water that's rushing into our streams. And with a road comes storm drains. A storm drain leads directly to the creek. It's just a path for the water to take so that our roads don't get flooded. So when people pour things down a storm drain and they think, oh, well, this will be filtered or cleaned out before, we use it, or people are unaware of how the storm system works. So if you pour something down the storm drain, you're pouring it right into the creek. And you'll see some of those signs that say drains to creek, water only, and that's why. So you have 20% of runoff going down in the storm drain or directly into the creek. with, you know, a little more suburban development, a few roads, you're losing your trees. Now you've got 30% runoff. You've got only 35% that's getting into the soil where we need it. And then when you have an urban area with almost 100% of impervious surfaces, roads, buildings, you know, you might have a few street trees and some grass, but it's mostly pavement that the water can't get through. Then you have 55% of that just running off into the stream. That's more than 5 times what you would have naturally. And you can imagine how our streams have reacted to that and how the banks have eroded. If you've seen a bank that has roots of trees sticking out of the side, that's part of the reason. And before I start on rain gardens, I still want to go over some terminology that we should know before we build. So infiltration or percolation is the act of water seeping in through the cracks in the soil particles. So if you've heard about aerated soil, this is why that's good, because water can get down to the roots of your trees and your plants, and it can replenish, if it gets deep enough, it can replenish aquifers or the wells where a lot of us also get our drinking water. Even if we don't have our own wells, I know a lot of companies like North Penn Water actually draw from wells, and they're selling you well water. So we need this to be replenished, because whether we know it or not, where the water comes from, we're either drinking it from the wells or we're drinking it from streams that are victims of pollution, a lot of pollution. So there are 2 kinds of groundwater. As it infiltrates, the groundwater, you know, you can imagine it comes through little particles in the soil, and then where does it go? It doesn't just go straight down, it spreads out too. And by spreading out, there can be underground trickles of water, and the water can travel underground to reach streams. You can see a little trickle or a little tributary sometimes of water coming up out of the ground and eventually entering the stream. Or the water can actually get down below the bedrock hundreds of feet below, and that's where the wells are, where the aquifers are. Leaching is when water picks up pollutants and dissolves soluble matter as it runs along, and this is how you get polluted stormwater runoff. As the water's running past things, or when people throw trash in the stream, that trash leaches out into the water pollutant particles. So the water's picking up these particles by leaching them and taking them to our streams. Now, there are point source pollutants. You'll see at the bottom, you'll see point source pollution is pollution that has a known origin. This is when you see people dumping things into the stream, or you know somebody's septic tank is leaking, and you can find a cause of that pollution. But the majority of pollution in our streams is actually non-point source pollutants. And you can see the definition up there is we don't know where some of it comes from. It just occurs. Some people are secretly dumping things, or it could be a combination of things that we do know happen. When people wash their cars, we drive by, people wash their cars all the time. That's a normal thing, right? Everyone washes their car at home sometimes. Well, if you wash your car at home, especially on a driveway, imagine all the things you're washing off your car, all the heavy metals and petroleum products and all that, pollution comes out of your car, so some of it sticks to your car, right? So you're washing that off of your car, and if it makes its way, if the water drains down your driveway and into the road, it goes down a storm drain, and where does it end up? In the stream. Mm-hmm. So, and you're using soap, so you've got detergent going in with that water as well. So this is one of the reasons a lot of people go to get their car washed. They're not just lazy, they're helping the environment, because most car washers or they're supposed to recycle their water. And most places you go to wash your car are going to be recycling that water and not letting it go into the stream. If you do wash your car at home, make sure you do it on your grass or an unpaved surface, so that it can be absorbed and maybe some of those pollutants could be filtered. So there are combined effects of many sources. So here you see the natural water cycle. Here's the infiltration of the rain happening, going into the soil. You can see the groundwater flow eventually ending up in the stream. So not only does water pass on top of the ground to get to the stream, it goes below ground to get to the stream. And then if it makes it down through the bedrock, it can replenish our aquifers. And this is a huge problem for us. If you've heard of the global water crisis and running out of water, we only have about 1% of the water on our planet is fresh drinking water that is accessible, that is not frozen in glaciers, and we can reach it. And most of it is streams and aquifers. And all of the farming in the Midwest has been using one giant aquifer to irrigate the farmland for years and years and years, and it's running out very quickly. So this is another problem. How do we replenish these aquifers? How do we get all this water to go down below ground so that it will clean itself, filter itself, and that we can use it? Does anyone have any questions about this figure? We've all seen it. I know, it's the water cycle from about first grade. But. So, I know this seems kind of negative, like we're polluting our earth, and what can we do? We live in a modern society. What are we going to do about all of this? Well, there are some really simple things. The good news is there are some really simple things that we can do in our daily lives, small changes that we can make like that can help to do all those things that we just talked about. So, a lot of these can be found in the pamphlet up here, the little brochure that unfolds, and there's a link to that in your handout. You can go see the 20 things you can do, 20 ways you can help on your own backyard. But I'll just list off a few right now. Just by planting native plants, which you're going to learn about with the rain gardens, you'll find out why in a second. If you increase your garden area and decrease your mowing area, a lot of grass, if you cut it really short, the water just rides right by it. If you heighten your mower, that too will help. Just having more green spaces that the water can infiltrate will help. If you, like I said, go have your car washed at a car wash, that will help. Avoid using pesticides. Use fertilizer only when you need it. Bag up your pet waste. When you go to the park, make sure you do that. Bring your bag. And recycle your yard waste as much as possible. And I'll talk about this at the end, but a lot of us rake up our leaves, get them off our lawn. We don't want our grass to die. We rake them up and we pay people to take them. But then in the spring, we want mulch. And that's what would be natural mulch. And then we pay people to come in and mulch our yards. But we gave them mulch in the fall. You kind of want that back in the springtime. You can save a lot of money too by just, saving your yard waste and using it as mulch. Don't dump anything down the storm drain. That might seem obvious. Recycle motor oil and other vehicle fluids. Check your car, make sure it's not leaking anything. And just think about reducing the hazardous waste from your own house. Cleaning supplies, you can look at, Sun and Earth is an organic, non-toxic cleaning supply company. You can check out companies like that for your cleaning supplies. That, what happens when you throw things in the dump? Well, water hits the trash in the dump too, and then that flows somewhere. So everything that we create can affect our water at some point.
And Krista, I've even read about people dumping medication down the commodes, and antibiotics and things like that actually contributing to resistant pathogens and things like that, is poisoning with medication.
That is a great question. Did everyone hear that? That is a hot topic right now, and actually if you go to CVS, right, if you go to these pharmacies, they'll have at the counter, I don't know if they charge, but they say, dispose of your medication properly, and they have bags for you to take. That's the only thing you can do right now. There isn't enough research on what this does, but you can imagine if, and there's so much medication these days. Imagine all of that, in our ocean. Dilution does not help all of that. You'll get to one point, and, dilution is not the answer. It used to be. So yeah, it's a big chemical soup. And
is all the salt that they use on the roads in the winter time, how is that affecting the?
that is another amazing question, and I could go on and on, but
That's why I was afraid to bring it up.
for some reason, in '96, I believe, based on the data that we have from Stroudwater Research Center, we started using, twice the amount of salt. I don't know what happened. The salt industry got, great advertising or something that year.
Snow was too.
Maybe, but this year, you'd think that the salt wasn't that bad this year, but you can see from the data, from the healthiness of our streams, you can see an immediate impact when we started using twice the amount of salt. And it is the cheapest, most efficient way of keeping our roads safe, and it's not gonna, we're not gonna stop using it, but we've gotta adapt, that practice in a better way. It goes into the streams. There's nothing else to say. Definitely the salt impacts the aquatic communities immensely. And we can talk more afterwards if you'd like about that. So, what is a rain garden? You all might have different reasons why you've come here tonight to learn about rain gardens, but the main purposes of a rain garden are to capture this runoff. Instead of letting it drain off your property or to flood your property, it will capture a lot of that, and then the plants will help filter the water of pollutants. The plants are amazing, and there are more and more studies each day about using plants, certain types of plants, and certain genotypes of plants to suck up different pollutants. I've even read a paper about the government using certain plants that have been cultivated to suck up heavy metals or even explosive materials that are left on training sites, like Army training sites or testing sites. They're actually, they're amazing. These plants are amazing. They can pick up these pollutants, and then I guess you burn the matter of the plants. I don't know what you do once the plants have sucked them up, but the plants can filter out a lot of these pollutants. And one of the ways they do it is by, all those extra fertilizers. Here's a good way to use them. All the extra nutrients in the soil, all the extra nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus in the water, they'll obviously use those. The roots will pick them up. Water will be purified from going through the process of photosynthesis. They'll use the water and then release what's left of the water molecules pure into the atmosphere, along with oxygen, which is important for us. And then what they don't filter out themselves, by having plants, small, herbaceous plants like this that have skinny fibrous roots that are like little nets underneath the soil, it creates a kind of a filter, like a coffee filter, for the water to go through, and then hopefully everything else gets caught up in those roots, or by percolating through the soil particles, the water can shed some of those horrible toxins as it moves through the soil and the root systems. So this is an amazing characteristic of a rain garden. And all of your gardens do this, but particularly rain gardens, from letting the water soak in. And that's the last goal of a rain garden, is to not only slow the amount that's rushing into the streams, but to let that water get back to where it wants to be underground so we can use it again. Let gravity pull it down and get it into the bedrock and, replenish our drinking source. Other benefits: it reduces flooding on your property. That is a really practical reason to build a rain garden. It's a great reason. And a lot of times, a new development comes in. You've lived in your house for 50 years, and then a development gets built behind your house, and they built it up so it wouldn't flood. But then all their water comes shooting down onto your property. There's no regulation for that, and there should be. But right now, a rain garden is one of the ways you can help alleviate that pressure and that flooding. It's a low maintenance landscaping. I'll talk about this again in a little bit. It's not no maintenance like a lot of people think, but it is low maintenance because you'll use native plants that don't need a lot of help in this climate. And with the native plants, you'll get the native birds and butterflies and all kinds of wildlife attracted to your yard, which is really nice and beautiful. And it can be a really nice place to be in your backyard. It's aesthetically pleasing. So now I'm going to go over exactly how to do it. It's not overly complicated. You should leave here feeling confident that you can go out and do this. It's just a slightly different garden, and you'll have the tools to do that in your handout. There are some great tools online for this to refresh your memory. There's actually a site with there's a manual that New Jersey put out that's just step-by-step instructions, easy to not mess up. But there are a few things you really need to think about before you start, and a few things that you need to do properly to ensure that your rain garden is going to work properly and not clog up or breed mosquitoes, which would be terrible. So the first thing you want to think about is, where do you put your rain garden? You want to put it near a downspout or a driveway because that's where a lot of the runoff's going to come from. You can collect your rainwater already in your gutter, and then you divert it down a downspout, and usually that's just leading out to the road. I know the Conservancy's was, and still is. We're going to hook up a cistern and a rain barrel to catch that soon. But you're already diverting it. Now all you need to do is direct it towards the location of where your rain garden's going to go. Alternatively, we had a situation at the Conservancy where we had water draining off of our parking lot, and we didn't even need to divert the water. We built the rain garden you saw on the last slide, and it collects enough water on its own. We didn't even need to divert anything or build anything to direct water. So you could also look for places like that where water is naturally pooling, causing a puddle on your property. You might already have an idea of where this is, but you want to make sure that you don't place it over your septic system. It's not going to infiltrate, or drain field. It's not going to be able to infiltrate the soil that way because there's going to be other stuff in its way. You also don't want it right next to your house because remember I talked about the water coming into the soil and then spreading out? Well, for every foot it goes down, it probably goes 3 feet out. So if you put your rain garden 10 feet away, you should be fine. That's a guideline most people go by, 10 feet, or 10 feet from your foundation. As it goes down, it could hit your foundation and degrade it over time or cause mold problems, or it's just bad. You don't want to flood your basement either. You also don't want to put it on a steep slope. If your yard is coming down and water's shooting down your property, if it hits a rain garden, it might just wash over it and not actually be captured by the garden. And obviously over a high water table, we have groundwater all the time, and we do in our area usually have a seasonally high water table, but there's an easy trick to find out if you're at a good spot to build a rain garden. And I'll teach you that in just a second. First, I just want to show you, I went out in the rain, and this is the best way to figure out where the water's naturally pooling on your property. I went out in the rain, this is at the Conservancy, and I found a few places, but this is the one I liked best. This is right next to, you can see a driveway that goes all the way around our property, and it's right next to the parking lot. So you have this gravel drive, and you have the water naturally pooling in this little divot on the side of the driveway. And that's what a watershed is, by the way. It's all about the grade, you know? If you were in a valley, the water would all go down in the valley. It's all gonna go by gravity to the lowest point, and that's where the stream is. So that's all it is, water, you know, hitting a surface and making its way down. So it made its way down the hill from Haldeman Ave and down the hill from the Conservancy building and landed right here. You can see it's really wet up there where all the leaves are. And I said, hey, we could use a rain garden there because it's puddling, it's not being infiltrated. So the next thing I did was I went out and I dug a hole. You want this to be about 6 inches in diameter and about 6 inches deep. And this is called the soil infiltration test. This is how you test whether if you build a rain garden here, is the water going to sink down and be absorbed enough by the soil, or is it just going to sit there? So you build a hole, and you can Google this, you can search it online. There are all different technical ways you can perform this, but the main rule is if you fill this hole with water, does it drain in a day? Does it drain in less than a day? If it does, this one drained in a few hours, and I said, all right, I'm good, look how dry this is. I drilled another hole next to 73 on our property, and I thought, wow, the water's really puddling here. Let me see if this is a good spot for a rain garden. Well, it turns out it wasn't a good spot for a rain garden because the reason the water was puddling there was because right, a couple feet under the surface, there's a slab of slate. You'll have the bedrock really high in some places, and obviously that water is not going to go anywhere. It's going to hit that slab of slate and it's not going to infiltrate. So I was like, all right, well, we would love to get rid of this water somehow and manage this stormwater on our property, but a rain garden's not the way to do it right here because it's just going to hit the slate and pile up in our garden, and we don't want that because you're going to breed mosquitoes. If the water doesn't drain within 24 hours, and ideally you'd like it to drain in 12, then you're going to breed mosquitoes. 24 hours is what they need to be able to lay their eggs. You can also, if you're really interested, you can get an optional soil test from Penn State. Sells them for about $12. They have instructions online how to take the soil and how to send it in, and they tell you what's in your soil. Does it have good nutrients? Does it have a lot of clay? There are mainly three sizes of soil, I'll call it. Clay is really fine. Then you have silt, or a lot of us have, that's what you think of when you think of soil, is like a silt soil, and then there's sand, and that's the biggest grain. So obviously sand with bigger grains is going to have bigger space in between, and water, we know, drains really quickly through sand. But with clay, the particles are a lot smaller, they're a lot closer together. Water hits it, and it's like a clay pot. It's not gonna go very fast through the water. So you can look at your soil and think about what you have. You're probably gonna have a little bit of clay in there. Our whole area is filled with a lot of clay, but you're gonna have it mixed with silt. So you're gonna have some mixture of between it. When you do build your rain garden, you're going to add compost. You need to add nutrients to the soil for your native plants to thrive on, and mix it in with that clay soil. It's going to also help that water to infiltrate the soil because we all do have a lot of clay content. Sometimes they sell bagged rain garden soils, and the ideal rain garden soil is what you see up here. 50 to 60% sand, it's going to drain really well. 20 to 30% of topsoil, and 20-30% compost, and only 10% or less of clay. So you're just trying to get the clay content percentage down. By adding this compost, you're going to help to do that. So the next thing you want to think about is the size of your garden. How big does it need to be? And it depends on your soil. So if you have a sandy soil, you have great drainage in your soil, then you only need to build it 20% of the size of the drainage area. And by drainage area, I mean, if it's coming from just your roof, then, and coming down the downspout, then you take the area of your roof and take 20% of that, multiply by 20%, and that's the size you need for your rain garden to take the entirety of the water that's hitting your roof throughout an average storm. With clay soils, you're going to need more room because that water isn't going to go anywhere once it hits the soil. it's gonna need time. So you're gonna need a larger garden to capture all that water and let it infiltrate slowly. And obviously, we're all going to be somewhere in between. So this isn't exact science. It's, taking an estimate. If you're further away from your house, and you're probably going to get your roof water and some more water, or if you have your neighbor's water coming in and the driveway, I mean, there is a way to calculate all of that, but you don't have to go through all that. You can make an estimate. I guess any garden that you make is going to help manage the stormwater, but you want to think about that. You can use these as guidelines to go by, to think about the size that you're going to need for your property.
And is that basically, in the case of good soil, 20% of any impervious surface that you introduce into your property, let's say?
Well,
the roof, driveways, what have you?
Yes, it depends what's draining into it. If your driveway is draining in a different direction, you're not going to count that. But whatever you can collect all in one big garden would be great. Sometimes you might want to break it up into a couple smaller gardens in different areas. I would just build as big as you're able to build. We're going to have 3 rain gardens on our property in different areas, taking care of different sources of water. But I'd say just start with the biggest one that you can afford and that you want to make and you have room for and looks like a good spot.
You could actually, I guess, recontour your land to some extent and create swales and do things in directing water intentionally.
Exactly. The average cost that you want to have in mind is this usually costs with the cost of plants and the mulch and compost, all the materials that you're going to need. It's $3 to $5 per square foot. And just as an estimate, the average residential rain garden is between 100 square feet and 300 square feet. So you could spend between $300 to $1,000, and you could spend as much as you wanted on this. Or you could start small, fill a few plants at a time maybe. Get your community to volunteer to do labor. Don't hire people to do labor, and reuse your yard mulch, your yard waste as mulch. You don't have to pay for mulch. There are all kinds of ways to bring the cost down with this, and you can make it cost as little or as much as you want, basically. But this is a good guideline to go by. Again, if this is your first garden and you just want to plan out, how much money do I need to put aside for the garden for these, different components of it. But most of the work you can do yourself, and it's the most intense thing is the digging, and then the planting is pretty fun, and you can get all kinds of people to help you out. Okay. And then there's something else I was going to say about size. If you really want to be exact, the handout that I gave you, let me put it on the handout. This Rain Garden Manual of New Jersey from Rutgers and the New Jersey Rain Garden Manual are that exact. You can go look at a chart and say, okay, I have a silty, loamy soil. It's in between clay and sand. It's right in the middle. And I'm this far away from my house, which is the drainage area. How big do I need my garden? And it will tell you. So you can just look at this manual. Check this out. They're really awesome. They're really good manuals. The next thing you might think about is shape. Question?
Yes, it may sound silly, but if you're going to reuse, like for instance, the leaves that you rig up for mulch, can you reuse them as their entirety, or do you have to get a shredder or a mulcher or whatever you call it to make them more compact?
Yes. You can use a chipper to cut them up. You don't want to have just a flat leaf, but you're actually anticipating me, but I wouldn't get to that to the very end. So yeah, basically what you do, and what I'm going to try out in a couple weeks, is laying out all my leaves. I had bags and bags of leaves that my intern collected for me, and I'm going to lay them out, and our chipper broke down. So I'm going to get a lawnmower from home, and I'm going to ride over them about 3 times, and then I'm going to have him rake them up again, and then I'll use them for the mulch. I think you might want to do some research before you get started on that. I think there are some oaks I've heard of the leaves interfering with certain things, and if you have a diseased tree, you don't want to use those leaves. For instance, you don't want anything that's going to carry a disease or a spore. But if you don't, I mean, if all of the trees, if you have a black walnut, forget about it. But there are certain trees like that you want to stay away from. But I looked around, and all the trees I could find looked good to use the leaves, so I've collected them, and I'm excited to use them to see how it works. It's a more natural process, and what would happen in a forest, all those trees and all those leaves and twigs would drop down, and that would degrade and feed the new trees. So
now, and how do you find out the trees that you should, the leaves that you should stay away from? Is that on one of these websites?
Well, I've just heard. The only thing I've heard is something about oaks, but that was like rumor. So I would just search, you know.
That could be a
yard
question
waste.
for an arborist too, perhaps.
Yes, yeah.
We have
They
one.
do.
Okay.
They do a lot of that.
Okay, thank you.
What's in black walnuts that you wouldn't use?
I don't know the name. This is so bad. I have it in my backyard. I can't think of the name of the chemical, but I think it's an allele chemical that they release, in everything basically, but even underground, the soil around the tree. A lot of trees have a mechanism where they'll release a hormone or chemical that will prevent other trees from growing. It's a really cool competitive adaptation that a lot of trees have. And I think black walnut has a really intense one. So nothing else will grow around it, and it could, yeah. And I learned my lesson because I grew a vegetable garden nearby, and I didn't realize how close it was. And I was eating these vegetables, and then I was like, okay, somebody told me, and I was like, okay, maybe I shouldn't have eaten those vegetables. They could have been pretty bad for me. But, and they grew pretty wimpy, so, and a lot of them didn't grow.
I would just add, if I may, because we have, I think, Linthus altissimas, which are invasive, the tree of heavens. And they also have a very mechanism like that that's not good. So it probably would be good to take an assessment of your lawn, look at the trees, because there's so many invasives here that are not natural that you ultimately want to eliminate from the system anyway, and that would probably help to reduce the leaf content that's not healthy or any other component of those trees.
And Norway maples also, nothing grows around them usually, so that might be another problem. But I don't know if they have it in their leaves. I know that.
Now you were mentioning black walnuts. Black walnuts overshadow the whole area where we would have a rain garden. Is there any particular that you? Now our bulbs do fine. Our tulips and our daffodils and what have you. We have hundreds of those under the black walnuts. But after that, it gets pretty thin as to what we can grow.
I would say plant a couple of the native species that you would plant in your rain garden and see how they do as a test before you start digging and excavating. Do a test on a couple of them, because it might mainly impact trees. But if that's the only space that you have, you might also look up the most hardy plants that don't care about anything and that will grow up anyway. Or like plants that adapted with black walnut. And do your research on the USDA website. Once you find a good list of plants that you would like, you can do further research on there and find out everything about the plant and try and pick the best ones to grow there. You can also just search, plants to grow under a black walnut tree, and hopefully you'll come up with a good list of mostly native species. Okay, shape, that's what I was getting to. Okay, so your shape of your rain garden, I suggest building it curvy. If you really want to build a rectangle, go for it. But it's nice to have curved, rounded corners because it reduces erosion of silt. If you have, a perfect square, or if, on the sides you have a straight drop, that's going to erode over time and become rounded. So why not just start out rounded? It's also easier to have it grade down because you're eventually going to make a slight grade down to the final level when you dig. And just a circular or a kidney or like a wavy shape is is easier to get that effect. And I think most gardens in the area are just curvy for other reasons. You do want to make it twice as long as it is wide. This just gives the water a better chance of infiltrating, having better space to do that. And I think it looks nice. But again, if you really want to do a perfect circle, try it out and see how it works. Let me know. Longest side perpendicular to slope. If you have a really steep slope, I'll do this again, and you put your garden, the longest side, right up against it, that water might rush down the slope and go right past your garden, wipe your plants away, take all the dirt with it. You might not capture as much, but you want it to be like this with the slope. And you don't want to plant it on a slope that's more than 12%. So you want a slight slope. And you can build it like this, going down the slope, so the water has more room to travel out before it eventually exits the water or the rain garden. Just give it more room to sit and settle down. So when you have your design in place and you pick your plants and you know what you're going to plant, you know the shape and everything, then you can get ready to excavate and build the shape of your garden. Now you can see on the right hand side, we use this machine called a dingo to rip up the sod in pieces, and then you can reuse that. You can re-sod areas, but you don't have to do that. You also don't need a tool. You can just dig with a shovel. It's fine. It's just going to take a little longer. But you need to dig about 8 inches deep. The idea of a rain garden is not a retention basin. You don't want the water to sit in there very long. You don't want, a hole in your backyard you could fall into. By the time it's done, you're not even going to be able to notice that it has a slight grade to it and that it's slightly lower than the rest of your yard or garden. And that slight grade, only the water is going to know to go in there. So you're going to dig 8 inches deep, which seems like a lot at first. But we're going to fill it out, remember, with that composted, nutrient-rich material, or that rain garden soil, before we're finished. So we're going to make up for that. It's good to lay out your shape before you begin with a rope, or I'd suggest rope rather than spray painting the grass or anything, or string, anything. Put up some stones or something. And then you can get people to help you too without screwing up your design. As you're building your hole, you're going to go 8 inches deep, but you have to make sure that everything's level. You want the water to sit nicely. You don't want it to tip like a bowl in different places. You want it to be nice and level. So after you get about 8 inches deep, you see they measured with a yardstick. Then you're going to use a 2x4. This is an easy way of making sure you're level, right? 2x4 on the ground in your hole with a level on top, and see if it's level. And then if not, you scrape away where you need to, and you can do that in different places and make sure it's level all over. And when it is, you want to use a rake to scrape out those sides around the outside of the garden, because like I said, you don't want a straight drop. You want it to slowly grade into the bottom and then have a nice big area that is 8 inches. Once you're done with that, you're going to berm the outside walls. What else is going to help you contain that water, especially if you're on a slope? If you build right here, your garden's going to be on a tilt. How do you get that level? Well, you need to dig extra from this side, and you need to build up on this side so that you can have a perfectly level rain garden, and you're going to have to berm this side. Even if you have a level yard to start with, you're going to want to make a berm around the garden so that the water can't just escape everywhere. We are going to make an escape route for when your garden overflows, but you want to make that a perfect escape route so you know where you're directing the water. You don't want it to just spill out everywhere. So when you berm, you don't want just a mud pile, because that will erode again and you'll get silt in your garden. Those little tiny silt particles will basically clog the nice filter that you make with your rain garden soil. So you want to sod, you can use those strips of sod to sod your berms, or you can use rocks like we did here to make a nice wall around your garden to separate it. Does anyone have any questions about the digging part? Or
Well, if you already have diabase, really good soil, and you're like, our property's basically in the woods, so, and we're new construction, so we really don't have any of that existing material. I trust then we have great percolation rate with our soil, which is unusual for Montgomery County. I assume we could just use that material.
rather than filling it in, I would still dig 8 inches and then chop up all that soil really fine.
Till it.
Get it, yeah, till it and get it really fun, like really aerated and, you know, fluffy and nice, and to prepare it. And then you can add, you know, whatever nutrient-rich material you have, like leaves from the woods and stuff like that. You can add into it, and then I have heard in places where it really won't drain, you can put a hole, basically dig a couple inches and fill it with sand. And you'll basically have these little pockets of sand that are, you know, like a colander to let the water drain through. If you trust your soil, then you could go for it. Okay. Try and go through the rest of this quickly, but enough so you get the main idea of this. So your water inflow, we already talked about diverting your downspout towards it, and you brought up you can build a swale which will help direct water into your garden. A swale is just it's not really deep, it's not a trench, it's just a little bit of a little alley for the water to follow. And again, you want to line this with rocks or seed it with grass seed so that it doesn't just rush muddy water down. And you can also dig a little hole to put your drain pipe in. If you don't put your drain pipe on the soil, you just dig a little hole for it to make it blend into the surroundings. The outflow path, I'll show you a picture in just a second, but you have an inflow, right? So instead of letting all of your water just escape, you're going to create an outflow for overflow water. And this is the exit. You've got your inflow entrance, and you need your exit. But you don't want your exit to be at the same height, right? Because then it'll go up both entrance and exit. So you want your exit, your outflow, to be a little bit lower. It's also going to be separate from your berm. You don't want just a path through your berm. And this is going to take water away from your garden when it overflows. So ideally, here's the 8 inches you dug, and you filled it with a few inches of rain garden soil or compost, and this is extreme. Disregard that. Here's your inflow. Say your inflow was at the 8 inch mark that you dug, right? You filled it with a couple inches of compost, and then you've got 6 inches. That's the maximum you want your garden to fill. 6 inches. You're going to have your outflow a little bit lower. You can see it's a couple inches lower than the inflow. Whatever you do, it'll go out the outflow before it goes back up the inflow and starts to flood. Does that make sense to everyone?
I'm sorry, actually, I'm thinking, wouldn't it be the reverse? Because it looks like your overflow is a little higher to control the amount of water that's being retained.
Well, that's what you have your berm to do. Your berm's going to hold the water in, but you're saying it looks higher on this?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, your overflow to the right looks higher if I'm looking at the projection of your line going across. That dotted line.
The line should either be sloping or I think it's straight across to show how it's level, but the inflow is actually up here where that arrow.
I see.
What's the lower thing, the lower dotted line under the arrow?
Right, that's
The
what I'm
one right here.
Yeah, it has blue in the center of the dotted lines.
Yeah, I think that's just some of the groundwater also heading in.
So that's not the inflow.
No, I would say it's coming up. It's coming down from a slope where those big blue arrows are. That's the, see, this is runoff from driveway or through ditch or pipe. That's the main one. So I just want you to see that your outflow should be lower, a couple inches, maybe 2 inches lower than your entrance for the water. This might not be the best.
Yeah, but it's actually higher relative to the rain garden.
Oh,
That maybe that's what's throwing me off. It says actually,
yes, yes.
you're allowing it to rise just a little bit. You're holding it in.
So you want to pull like 6 inches or less, usually like 2 to 4. So if you've got, you can see the surface of the rain garden where the plants are, and then the outflow is a couple inches above that. And then
Now we're
the inflow is a couple inches above that.
So that's the type of soil then that the majority of the water will just seep in through that. So that's the goal of a rain garden.
Yes, you want most of your water to collect, and you don't want to collect more than 6 inches, and you want it to drain within 12, ideally, but 24 is fine as well, with the heavy rain. And you just want to be able to direct any overflow, because you can't handle all of that water if there's a big storm. You're not going to be able to take all of the water from your roof at that point, and you don't want it to just spill everywhere. You want to direct it to another garden or a storm drain, hopefully to another garden or another permeable space. But you want to have control of that to manage it so that it's not just runoff grabbing new pollutants.
And is it fair to say that if you have especially good percolation rates and you're taking that 6 inches of that hole that you dug to start, 6 by 6, and it's actually draining in, let's say, 3 hours, hypothetically, or just use a number, wouldn't that tend to suggest then you could increase the difference to even have more than 6 inches, knowing that you're going to uptake that or absorb that, relative to your baseline of 12 or 24 hours?
Yes, as long as you know that your water's not going to sit there for 24 hours, you could hold a larger quantity than 6 inches. 6 inches is the guideline for around here, but if you have exceptional soil, then you can probably handle more. For most people around here, though, you don't want a little swamp pooling in your backyard. Basically, this will, it'll rain one day, and it'll look like I can show you that picture again from our rain garden where it showed you from the road. It had just the rocks, and then the water had pooled. That was only a couple inches of water above the mulch layer, and that went down the next day. That was right after a storm. And then when you come in the next day, it's just a normal garden again. So if you build it, I would be more conservative to hold less and then see how it goes, and then maybe on your next rain garden you can build it deeper, or then you can amend it later on. But you want to make sure that it drains in 24 hours. So now you get to the fun part. You get to plant your plants, and you want to order all native species, and there are all different ideas about how you want to plant them. So when you're selecting your plants, you want hardy plants that are going to survive for a while and to be low maintenance. You want them to be able to handle wet feet. That is, when the rain comes and we do have a couple inches, they should be able to handle that extreme, water or like swampy ground layer. Then you might have periods of drought when you need those plants to survive through a dry spell as well. So they need to like a lot of water for a little bit, and then dry soil for a while. Do you have a question about that?
I was just thinking of underground springs.
So you know your yard, you know where the water pools, you know how your soil is, like you said, pick the plants that will do best in your environment that you have in your backyard. Are you in the shade? Are you in the sun? And what's neat about these websites, the one right here, this is an example that I pulled from this website up here. You can go on, say your general area where you're in, and we'll select the Piedmont zone. There's also the mountain zone to the west, and then you'll see us, Piedmont, in that section. You click there, you click whether you're in the sun or the shade, and you click whether you want your garden to be resistant to deer, if that's a really I couldn't believe that. But if you want your garden to be good for butterflies, you want your garden, you can click on design by function, and they give you these designs already made. And I usually don't go with just the design. I like to add my own little thing to it. So I would probably change a couple things around, but you can use this as a guideline, or you could just follow it. And it says, 1A, so you'll put 1 pink mully grass there, and then 11B, you'll put 11 happy returns daylilies there, and follow. And this one was, you can see, this was to have a herbaceous perennials garden that had pretty flowers. That was the point of this design. And it's 200 square foot, and it's for a full sun zone. So you can find, designs even for your exact situation.
Krista, may I suggest another resource that we found is exceptional on this one? John Rogers has a book that he writes. He's from the area, called Designing with Natives. You can actually find it on Amazon, and we actually have on this YouTube channel that we're preparing this video an hour presentation. And he actually takes you through looking at your lawn, identifying what Krista said: sunny, moist, sunny, dry, shady, moist, shady, dry, and tailoring your plants and that type of thing to each of those things. And I would highly recommend that as a resource. Are you familiar with that book?
I've heard of it, yeah. That's great. And things people don't even think of, like whether your soil is acid or alkaline,
exactly.
And what plants would thrive there. If you don't think about all the little details, you're still going to have a pretty garden, and most of your plants are going to survive. But if you do think about the details, it'll make your garden that much better. Just a little bit of thought, a little bit of searching and researching. One of the things also with picking plants, other resources that have made it very easy. If you look on the back of the first page, plant selection, amazing and easy to use sites. Plantplaces.com, that website, or the I Conserve PA website, plant database. You basically put in your situation, and it pops out the plants that are best, that are native and for you to use for your rain garden. And then it's all about design from there. And designing is not my forte, but most people say to plant in clumps of the same plant. That usually looks nicest, and plus you're also going to have zones. Think about this. You're going to have a wetter zone in the middle of your rain garden, and you're going to have a slightly drier zone on the sides of your rain garden, and then you're going to have a really dry zone on the outside because of the slight gradation that you've got going on. So you want to plant the right types of plants for that amount of wetness that they're going to see. And what will help you do that is just to put all the ones that need to be in that space in the same spot. It makes it a lot easier, and it looks nice. And then you want to think about height. What is the eventual size of my plant going to be? I don't want to have all the tall ones on the outside shading out all the inside ones, and then no one will see them. You might want to, think about that kind of thing. And you can see here, get your neighbors to help. If you have friends, bring them over, because that gets them interested in rain gardens too. And then they'll say, why don't I build one of these in my yard? I've got all this flooding coming from my neighbor's yard. Why don't I take care of that with a garden rather than putting up a berm wall or something? Get people involved, and then you don't have to do all the work by yourself. And look at this. We laid out caution tape. I said, all right, here, plant this whole tray in this little space, and look at these little kids can do it. And they had fun. And then this was for their school. This was at St. Stan's School. And now they have a whole rain garden that they all helped to build. So it can be a nice, large community effort if you'd like it to be. And the thing I want to stress is when you're looking at the plants, when you look them up, you get a design, you say, oh, great. You don't have to think about this. But if you make your own design and you look at the plants that you want to put in, think about the eventual size. How wide are they going to be? How tall are they going to be? Because you can end up with things like this. This was a good concept, but you can see they planted things all different places, It doesn't look as nice that way. And they completely overcrowded it. It's coming out onto the sidewalk. And they had this nice placard or sign about their community effort. They had a nice outflow going into the storm drain or whatever they couldn't handle. It's on the road, which is it's a good spot because you're going to get a lot of pollutants coming from the road. But yeah, they planted too close together. I don't know if they were planning for, a low survival rate or something, but they're going to have to weed this down and, try and make it nicer. Do a little maintenance on that. So finally, what your last step is, you've dug your hole, you've picked your plants, you've put in a nice layer of compost, and you mixed it in with all of your soil. You want to mix that original soil in with the compost and make a good mix because the plants are eventually going to feel that other soil. And then you're going to mulch it. What mulching does is it helps prevent weeds from going in, from growing around your plants. It'll lessen the amount of maintenance you have to do, but it helps retain moisture. So a lot of the water that goes into this rain garden gets diverted into the garden is going to be soaked up by mulch as well and then slowly released to the plants and taken care of. And when you're looking for mulch, you might see all these dyed mulches, you might see bright red mulch and pretty browns, and I've even seen blue mulch, but it's all synthetic dyes. They say they're not toxic. I did hear a story on the news today about how they were toxic, but I would say whatever you put into these, you can see that they stain your hands and they get all over your shoes and track through the house. So obviously the dye's coming off of them. So if the dye's coming off of them, when the rain hits them, it's going to wash that away. A lot of that dye is going to go out of your garden. So I would say stay away from the dyed stuff. It's just going to add to the amount of unnatural chemicals in our water. And I think there are mulches that look just as nice that aren't dyed. And the best mulches are hardwood because they carry few fungal spores, which is another problem with wood mulch. And triple ground is nice. It'll break down easier over time. And you want to ask how many weed seeds are in here. You go through all this effort to put the mulch down to prevent weeds, but a lot of times they'll say you'll say, oh, this is really cheap. Why is that? How many weed seeds? Make sure you ask so you're not just putting more weed seeds onto your garden. But the best way to stay away from this and not attract termites and not put something down that has bad fungal spores attached to it, and that won't float away. If you build your swale even, that's your entrance to your garden, and you put mulch in there, it's just going to float away. And a lot of the mulch can float away from your garden too. The best thing to do is to use your yard waste, like we already talked about. Grind it up. Use the twigs too if you can. Just use that natural material instead of paying people to take it away and then paying people to put mulch on your property. Use your own mulch. I'm a big proponent of that, especially since there's been a gunshot fungal outbreak with mulch. A lot of people have you heard of this? A lot of people have put mulch down, and it contained a fungal spore that they're calling gunshot fungus. And basically it's called that because it shoots out and spreads everywhere. And the spores will attach to a building, your house, your car, and they don't come off. And a woman today told me she's been through the car wash for a year now, trying to get this fungus off of her car, and it won't go away.
Is it like little black dots that are left?
I think so. I think that's what. Yeah, it's like I don't know how. I think they get smaller as you try and clean it, but yeah. And that mulch can carry that a lot of times. I think that's where it comes from. There are good funguses if you're planting a tree. Trees need good fungi to attach to their roots and help them uptake nutrients. But those aren't the fungi that are being spread, the fungal spores that can affect people's health too and cause all sorts of problems with your house as well. Another thing, talking about trees, you can have some room for shrubs in your garden, and you might have room for a tree or two, but you're going to have a much larger garden to have space for a tree. So you might see them in a commercial, like in a corporate complex. You might see a rain garden or retaining basin that has trees in it. They're big enough for trees, but most gardens at home, you'll only have room for a shrub or two. The last thing you want to think about is maintenance. When you're done, you're not done for good. It is low maintenance, but it's not no maintenance. You still have to water it. The first 14 days especially, you want to give it enough water. I'd say about at least an inch a week. And weed it periodically. Eventually, all those plants will grow up and take all that space, and you won't have room for weeds. That's one of the nice things about a rain garden, is that these native plants thrive really well. And they'll shade out eventually all your weeds, and you won't need to weed anymore. That's awesome. You might want to remulch as needed. Take the next year's amount of yard waste and grind that up and toss that in as well and rake it around. Just keep adding to it, and making sure that it's working correctly, make sure it's infiltrating, it's not staying wet after 24 hours, and make sure that no erosion is happening. Make sure the water isn't carrying away your berm, or your inflow and outflow aren't becoming misshapen with all the water going by. And if it is, you can replace it with a rock. An easy thing to do is to put one big rock underneath your downspout, so that water doesn't just keep hitting the same spot in a big flow. It'll hit the rock and then disperse and then slowly trickle down one small, clump of drops at a time instead of the whole thing. And then you can use these rocks to kind of divert the water so that they're not eroding your nice, pretty shape. What was your question?
Yeah, with respect to homegrown mulch on a property, if you have a lot of trees, and we see the leaves come down in the fall and the previous season, they're lower packing. Insofar as harvesting your old mulch, collecting it up, using it, and then applying it, are there particular seasonal things when you do that, you picking up and then using it? If you could touch on that, I'd appreciate it.
A lot of people mulch in the fall as their leaves fall, and so they grind them up, throw them in their garden right away, and that might also help insulate some, to protect against temperature drops too. As you get it, you can just keep adding it, and we had a ton of leaves still on our property this, in March, and I know it was a weird year. We had very little snow, but I collected them recently and bagged them up, and you can also just pile them and make your own compost pile out of them. But really, that whole season, spring to fall, you can buy mulch when you need it, or use your yard waste when you have it.
And there's no problem going down deeper from a previous season where you start to get some of that decomposition?
When you go down deeper and it starts to get wet and sludgy, that stuff's great, but it's more of a composting material by then. And it probably won't look nice up top. I would say, put that down first. That will still help. And then put the drier stuff, grind it up and put that on top.
So you're almost basically, you could be duplicating what happens naturally.
Exactly.
Which makes perfect sense.
Putting the nice layers. And I've heard all sorts of tricks. One woman was telling me she puts newspaper down, and that keeps all the weeds from coming up, all the previous year's weed seeds. And then she puts, she fills the hole back up with the soil, and then with fresh composted soil without weed seeds, and then each year she just has to, she can till again and break up the soil again, but she doesn't need to add anything else or use anything to kill weeds, or she has very minimal weeding again, and just keeps adding the natural yard waste material on top of that. And I think she might, layer it, each year. Maybe she put newspaper and then the natural material. So there's all sorts of tricks for that.
Because we have an area in the back of our yard that we put grass clippings and leaves and everything like that, and it's wonderful soil, but I have so much weeds. When I put it on my flower beds or in my gardens or something, I end up with lots of seed spores that then cause a lot of other problems.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm defeating the purpose. And so you said newspaper on top of that helps?
I would put, for that, I would just keep the leaves separate, the leaves and twigs, and not use the, you know, the fruits or the seeds.
So you would keep that separate from the grass clippings and I'm not quite following.
I would use, I mean, if you can separate your leaves and your twigs, not the reproductive parts of the plants, and then not spread those seeds, then you're gonna be better off. But when your garden,
blow around and, you know,